welcome back to the Scar of the Faithful podcast. This is my preview for Rutgers men's basketball for the 2025-2026 season. I've been pretty silent on hoops throughout the preseason. For one, I don't have as much time anymore with my my current job. But two, I wanted to take a lot of thought into this preview and just talking about this team. There's been a good amount written, and expectations are about as low as they've been in the Steve Pikiell era for many years. Obviously, just a quick intro for those of you that don't listen to me on a normal basis. I mean, I've been a Rutgers basketball fan for 40 plus years. Went to games when I was a kid. I was at the 89 Penn State Atlanta 10 final, section 118. I was there. I've been to many memorable games over the years, and I've covered this team for the last decade, formerly On the Banks, then Scar of the Faithful website, now obviously this podcast. And, this is the first media day I missed in Steve Pikiell's tenure due to work. I wasn't able to make it. So I haven't seen this team practice. First time going into the year, I haven't seen the team practice. But I've watched a lot of film on this team. I've talked to people. I've read a lot, and I just, I've watched a lot of film. And, I'm trying to figure out where I want to start. I do actually have an outline, but just in terms of Steve Pikiell, this is year 10. And it's at a critical point of his tenure. Obviously, Kelly's in now, new AD, Pat Hobbs, who hired Pikiell's gone. Just want to clarify, just in terms of, I've seen a lot of comments lately, and, that whole buyout clause, that was Pikiell leaving if Hobbs left on his own. So in terms of the way people are looking at, Steve Pikiell and being on the hot seat and all that, I don't see it strictly from a contract standpoint, because they would owe him over $20 million if they did fire him this year. Now, Steve Pikiell's done a lot of good for this program. I am extremely grateful for all he's done for this program, but there's no denying the last 3 years have been a disappointment. And when you have success, you reset expectations. And I think if he was asked and he was truthful, he would admit how disappointed he has been with the last 3 years. I mean, how can you not? Especially after last year. Certainly the tipping point, I think, in terms of how we may end up looking at this tenure when it's all said and done, because you had a golden opportunity with Harper and Bailey, 2 top 5 lottery picks, 2 generational players on one team, and Rutgers didn't even make the NCAA tournament. They didn't have a winning record, and it was really tough to watch. It was hard to take. Obviously, they had some challenges. They had some injuries. If Dylan Harper doesn't get hurt, it could have been just kind of a ho-hum, make the NCAA tournament, maybe win a game, not a disaster, but not, achieving kind of what we all had hoped they would in terms of the second weekend and really raising expectations and the ceiling for the program. But they didn't. And, it's unfair to say to not bring up NIL. Obviously, that's a factor. They weren't able to build a good enough team around Harper and Bailey. And, at the end of the day, that's on Pikiell. I totally disagree with the idea that, he sat back and waited for Rutgers to hire an NIL manager, GM, as they have this past week. I know he made an effort. I know he tried. He failed in getting the NIL that he needs, but everyone has at Rutgers. But he has failed. But I don't think it's for a lack of effort. I think, you could argue it's for a lack of know-how. It's for a lack of ingenuity. I think that this is where I've kind of brought up in the past, Steve being able to get out of his comfort zone, get out of his inner circle, and really reach out to people to get advice and to get input and make other connections that could lead to bigger things. And I think that maybe the willingness to do that hasn't been there, and that's been frustrating for me. I think Pikiell has a lot of good attributes. I think stubbornness is good and bad, and I think it's hard as a fan base to see that there were no shakeups with the staff. I think loyalty is a great thing, but at the same time, not continuing to challenge and bring in new ideas and evolve and adapt is a big negative also. And that's, I think we're at a crossroads here going into this season. And I don't want to be negative. I want to be hopeful. Listen, I mean, if you look across the media landscape, I mean, Rutgers has extremely low expectations. They're picked in the bottom three pretty much, I think, by everyone. I haven't seen an optimistic pick anywhere. Penn State and Rutgers generally thought of as the two worst teams. Minnesota's not thought of as very good either. And it's going to be, I think when you go into the season that your ceiling is kind of like to be on the bubble for the NCAA tournament, it's all about context, and it's year 10. And yes, NIL has been a huge challenge, but year 10 of Steve Pikiell, for that to be kind of the ceiling, it's disappointing. It's very disappointing. And I think, when Steve came in, he was extremely open. He was extremely positive. He had a vision. He sold it well, and he was inspiring. And he inspired me, and he opened doors for me just in terms of, wanting to make community connections and not carrying, anyone that wanted to cover this team, he was all about, and anyone that wanted to support this team. And, he talked about building a community, and that's how he did it at Stony Brook. And I think what's been tough to take is in the last 3 years, when you see how it's impacted him and kind of his, I don't want to say mindset per se, but just his demeanor publicly, how he's been in the media, how he's handled some losses, how he's kind of handled the fan base. He's become defensive, and I think two comments he made at Media Day really stuck out to me as kind of proving that point. And the first one was talking about how he made a quip about, no one expected him to make it past year 2. And that's just not true. And I mean, at that point, he was taking over for Eddie Jordan. Rutgers hadn't been successful in decades. No one was expecting him to turn it around in year 2. And if he hadn't, that he was going to be shown the door. That just isn't reality. And then the second part was when he said that when he did turn it around, he did it with 2-star guys and, didn't have a lot of talent. And I forget the exact quote, but it was pretty much like, he made something out of nothing. And yes, he took a core of Caleb McConnell, Geo Baker, Miles Johnson, and Ron Harper Jr., and he made this program relevant. He made this program successful. I mean, this program was so close to going to 4 straight NCAA tournaments. You had the COVID year that snake bit that season. And then you had, the last team out after the, injury to Mag and kind of they fell apart down the stretch, which, again, is on him as a coach. But they barely missed it then. And then the last 2 seasons, they bottomed out. They haven't had a winning season. I want to say I hope they've bottomed out. And I guess for him to make those 2 comments, right, because that's not true about that team at all. I mean, listen, Geo Baker was a 3-star, Ron Harper was a 3-star, Caleb McConnell was a 3-star. I mean, I think they each had 1 Power 5 at the time or high major offer each, which is not much, and they were not highly sought after. I think if Harper had not committed before his senior year, he probably would have gotten a lot more offers. But besides that point, he was under the radar, even though his father and family history and all that. But listen, you had Montez Mathis, right? 4-star recruit that you beat out UConn for. You had Jacob Young, a former 4-star transfer from Texas, with a family pedigree, certainly notable. Paul Mulcahy was highly recruited, was a not a consensus 4-star, but 4-star by some. And then you had Cliff Omori, who was a 4-star top 50 center coming off the bench. So this team was not devoid of talent. Steve did a fantastic job of building that team and developing that team and making Rutgers into a winner. And he deserves all the credit in the world for that. And I guess for him to make those 2 comments to kind of diminish the reality of those situations, it makes me sad. It makes me sad that, he's become so defensive that he feels he has to make the past misrepresent it in a way that makes it sound worse to justify the present. And that to me is a bit, upsetting, because I really like Pikiell. I think he's a very good basketball coach. He's respected. I think he's just really struggled as things have evolved in the NIL era. And it's not just the money. I think it's the team building, the roster building, the meshing of players, the ability to build a nucleus over a period of years. That was his bread and butter, and it's just much harder to do that nowadays. And I think that he's struggled to kind of find a new code to be able to reach his team and get the most out of them in that type of environment. I think in addition to that, I know he's fully supportive of NIL, and I know that he fully supports players, making money for themselves. There's no doubt in my mind that he believes in that. And he was extremely supportive of Geo Baker and all that. But I do think it's been an adjustment for him. He's an old school coach in terms of some of the price tags that these players command and some of the money that even just kind of role players demand. And I think that it's blown his mind a little bit, and he struggled with kind of accepting, investing that type of money into players that haven't played for him before. I think that's, a little bit of been a struggle. And I'm not saying that maybe the results would have changed if that wasn't the case. And maybe I'm wrong in that sense, but I also kind of feel that if you do have that type of mindset, if that is kind of a bugaboo that bothers you, right? And that you're not fully invested in investing in these players that haven't done anything for you yet, it makes it harder. It makes it harder for you to believe as a coach. It makes it harder to get those buy-in from players. It's one of those kind of aura things that I think exists out in nature that maybe you can't put your finger on, but it's there, it's real, and it's energy, and it's not a good thing. So I think going into this year, it does seem refreshing that Pikiell has a lot more players on his roster that are his types of players, that are hard-nosed, that are blue-collar. He smartly sent Jay Young to Europe and recruited, and I think he got some players that are going to help this team. And I think that doing that shows a willingness to adapt for sure. He's always kind of been that way, though. I mean, he's always recruited Africa. He's always looked for outside of the box. He's been recruited at JUCO level. He's recruited everywhere. In terms of this team, I think what's tough going into the year, reason for pessimism, is that a lot of things with this team have to go right for them to have a, winning season. Not even like a super successful season, like just to be in the conversation in the NCAA tournament bubble. Of 10 things you need to go right, you need like 8 to go right. And that's where kind of, expectations are tempered, and where my expectations are tempered. I think a lot of things have to go right. For me, the number one thing that has to go right is Harun Zrno, the 6'7" guard wing out of Europe, has to be a legitimate Big Ten scorer. Has to be. If he can't score 15 points a game, I don't know who on this team will. And he has the ability to be efficient. I really like his game, his ability to hit the three. I think he's got a pretty good handle for his size. I think he's versatile. Can he defend at this level? Can he be on the floor 30, 35 minutes a game? Can he be the guy they go to at the end of games to take the shot when they need it most? That for me is the biggest need, biggest question for this team. Can Zrno be the guy? Can he be the guy that can win this team games with the last shot? Can he be the guy that hits clutch buckets down the stretch? Can he be the guy that they lean on and be, truly the leader on the court just from a efficiency and results standpoint? That above all else to me is the biggest thing that has to go right for this team to have any chance at all to be successful. If he isn't that, if he's a 35% shooter from the floor, a 30% 3-point shooter, he averages 10 to 12 points a game. If he struggles defensively, with his foot speed and things like that, physicality, I can't see them exceeding, that 17th, 16th place type of preseason expectation. I really love the length at wing, with Darren Buchanan from GW, with obviously Grant back this year, second year, and then the freshman Chris Newley. I really like those three players. I like what they bring to Rutgers. I like what they bring in terms of toughness. I like what they bring on the defensive end. I think that they can cause some problems on the press. I think, in the half court, I think the perimeter defense as Rutgers as a whole could be really good. I think those three guys, unfortunately, I think, they're going to be battling each other for minutes unless Pikiell gets a little bit inventive with the rotation. I mean, I think those three guys need to be on the floor a lot with Zrno, which raises questions, right? I think those are your four best players coming into the season. That's just my kind of guesstimate, but that's how I'm looking at it. I think those are your four best players. And it's like, how do you get those four best players, if that is the case, on the floor at the same time? Can Zrno handle the point at times? You have a really small backcourt, super big concern for me. Pikiell talking in the offseason about wanting to get back to basics, wanting to get back to what, this team's done best defensively. Well, they've always done best defensively when they have big guards. So I was very surprised that they added Tariq Francis, smaller guard. They obviously have J. Mike returning. They added Lino Mark. All have their positives, but as a whole, to have 3 6'1", 6'2" slight guards, to me, that's a big question mark for this team. How does that work? We know Davis can be effective defensively. We know it can be efficient at times in terms of assist to turnover ratio. He's not a consistent scorer. He's not a good shooter. Francis has not shot well in his career at the low major level. Lino Mark is an unknown. Obviously, his tape, I like his tape. He's a speedy guy. He can get up and down the court. Listen, this team needs to find an edge. They need to find an angle. What are they going to do well that can exploit other teams? Are they going to be, balls to the wall, running up and down the court, full throttle, rotating these guys in and just pressing and fast breaking as much as humanly possible? That could be an exciting style. That could make this team interesting. That could give this team an edge that maybe, if you're not going to be a great shooting team, which I don't think they will be, you want to avoid as many half-court situations as possible. You want to try to get turnovers and get on the break and score in transition. That's what this team, in my opinion, probably needs to do a lot of. Will they be able to do it? Remains to be seen. But there's question marks there with the backcourt, how Pikiell is going to utilize them in the rotation. I think the X factors for this team are Dennis Badalou, another big wing out of Europe, and then obviously Bryce Dortch. How much has he developed in the offseason? He's a wiry, springy guy that's very athletic. That I've liked what I've seen from him at times. Obviously not enough to really know, but can he be a factor? Can he be in this rotation? Can he be a defensive stopper? He's been compared to Caleb McConnell in the past. Newley has now as well. Can those guys become defensive stoppers for this team? This team has to be, I think, individually, defensively, I don't know how many are top 5, top 10 Big Ten defenders. This team in the past has had multiple guys that are, but can this team collectively as a defensively be a top 5 Big Ten team defensively? Okay, they kind of have to. They really have to. They need to be a top 3rd Big Ten defensive team to have success this season. If they're not, then it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a struggle. They're going to have to win games in the 50s and 60s. They really are. I don't know how much this team's going to score. And then interior defense for me is a concern. Agbole and Bay Fall, have potential. Obviously, Agbole is a stud physically. Fall was a big-time recruit, 5-star recruit, has not panned out. It's pretty slight. I'm worried about how these guys hold up defensively inside in Big Ten play. From a rim defense, from a fouling perspective, because if You have good perimeter defenders. You have smaller guards. If there is penetration, if teams are attacking the rim, if they're your last stand in defense, I'm concerned to see how they hold up. It doesn't, not to mean they can't become legit rim defenders for this team in Big Ten play, but I have to see it before I believe it. And that certainly is something that's of a concern for this team. I think they're going to have to exhibit a lot of ball pressure. Those speedy small guards, a lot of ball pressure. I think this team should press a lot. I hope they do in the half court as well. I mean, they have to really man up and on ball pressure. I mean, we've seen Davis do it. Can Mark and Francis deliver? Can the length at wing? With Newley, with Buchanan, with Grant, can they get in the passing lanes? Can they jump passes? Can they be disruptors of can they disrupt shots? Can they close out on threes? There's a lot of question marks. I think defensively, this team could be, middle of the pack defense. Can they be a top third? I don't know. If they can, then all the credit to Steve Pikiell. Obviously, it's his bread and butter. I think he's a very good defensive coach. Obviously, last year's team was complete Jekyll and Hyde for him. They could score points in bunches, but, were inefficient at times, but could not get a stop. And, kill shots when you go on a 10+0 run. This defense is going to have to produce that. Can the offense get enough runs where they can complement the defense? That's going to be a big question mark. Who's going to shoot threes on this team? Obviously, Zrno's one that's going to have to shoot 35% or better. Badaloo has a chance to do it as well. Smaller sample size, but could. In his career, Buchanan has not. Grant, kind of hot and cold, not really a top 3-point shooter. Maybe he's developed that in the offseason. Again, Francis and Davis have not been in their careers. So that raises a lot of questions on that end in terms of who's going to shoot threes for this team. And if they can't shoot threes, how efficient are they going to be inside? I mean, one thing this team has struggled for years is making layups and free throws. Can this team do that? Remains to be seen. Statistically, in terms of their careers, they're not great in terms of what they have coming in. So you're going to have to see that become a thing. And, the schedule, certainly the first 5 games are very doable here. I'm starting to just kind of roll here a little bit, maybe a little bit of a ramble, but, your first 5 games, you host Ryder on November 5th. So 2 days from now on Wednesday at the Rack. Then the following Monday, you have Maine. Then you have Lehigh. Then you have American. Then you have Central Connecticut State. None of these teams are ranked very high. Got to pull up the KenPom. Almost forgot to do that. A little bit rusty here in terms of not in midseason form yet. Rutgers, by the way, starting the season 85th in KenPom. In terms of the Big Ten, that is 17th. Only Penn State is worse at 95th. Minnesota is 16th at 73. Northwestern's 15th at 57. So Rutgers starting the year pretty far behind the pack in the Big Ten. In terms of that opening schedule, all 5 opponents, 4 are worse than 300. Ryder is 302. Maine is 284. Lehigh is 306. American's 312. Central Connecticut is 315. So obviously you have to win all those games, but this is where, this team can learn about itself. Steve Pikiell could tinker. I think one criticism of Pikiell that's extremely fair from last year is that he was not able to really settle on a rotation. And part of that's inconsistency, part of that's injuries, but he did not really make decisions, right? They were still playing a 10-man rotation late in the season. You can't do that. You need 7 or 8 guys at once you get into the thick of it. And I think him being able to make those decisions earlier are going to be key to this team because then you have, the Players Festival in Vegas for Thanksgiving. You obviously have Tennessee on that Monday, November 24th. It gets real then. That's just 3 weeks away. Unbelievable. They're number 9 in KenPom. Tennessee, a very hard-nosed team. Rick Barnes, they play, always top 5 defensive efficiency nationally. But they have some guys that could score as well. This could be an extremely tough game, but will certainly be a litmus test for Rutgers and certainly be a great test for them before Big Ten play. Then you have Notre Dame, who's 77th in KenPom. That's certainly a winnable game, but not an easy game. Mike Shrewsbury in year 2 there. They've always had some battles. Rutgers barely beating them last year, so they're probably going to be underdogs in this game. KenPom has them losing that game by 1. We'll see. But that is an opportunity for a big non-conference win. Then you come home and you play two top 10 teams ranked right now in the AP. Purdue is at home, and then you go to Ann Arbor at Michigan, possibly the two best teams in the Big Ten. So certainly schedule makers did not do them any favors there. So you play, and then I forgot the third Players Festival game. We'll see, so many teams in that tournament, who they get for that third game. But listen, if you could beat Notre Dame and win that third game, you're going to have some momentum in non-conference, and you have a chance to go 10-1, which, if you want to be in the NCAA bubble conversation, you kind of have to do. Then you got, like I said, Purdue and Michigan, Seton Hall on the road this year. They're 93rd. So that's a toss-up game. You got a chance to win that game. Then you host Penn and Delaware State before the new year. And then January 2nd, back-to-back home games against Ohio State and Oregon, both top 40 KenPom teams, both expected to make the NCAA tournament. Big Ten play starts pretty rough. Those are 4 tough games to start in Big Ten play. Then you go on the road at Illinois, who's number 6 in KenPom. And then, you host Northwestern, who's 57th. So there's a legitimate chance you start Big Ten play 0-5. And if you start 0-5 and you have an upset loss in non-conference play, you're kind of right where, the doomsday predictions say you're going to be. Hopefully, this team can exceed expectations. They can win 2 games at the Players Festival. Worst case 1. You hold serve in all the games you're supposed to win in non-conference play. And in that first 5, can you steal one? Can you steal one at home against Ohio State? I mean, that's possible. And then after Northwestern, you have Wisconsin on the road, Iowa on the road. Wisconsin's 20th in KenPom, Iowa's 46th. Then you have Indiana at home, number 40. I mean, Indiana at home, that would be a huge win for this program, always is. Then you have Michigan State at home. Believe it or not, should be at the rack this year. Finally, Izzo makes the Piscataway after getting embarrassed a few years ago. Then you're, West Coast trip at USC, at UCLA, USC 22, UCLA 10. Going to be very difficult there. Then you host Nebraska, who's at 51, Maryland as well. That's a huge homestand in February. Both teams in the 50s. Those are 2 games you pretty much have to win to have any chance to get close to 500 in Big Ten play. Then you're at Penn State. Play Penn State twice. You got to sweep Penn State to have any chance to get to 500 in Big Ten play. You also play, Maryland twice, which we knew. And then the other team they play twice is, of course, missing it at the moment. But I'll figure it out at some point. Maybe that's just the only 2 they play twice. You have Michigan State Michigan State. They play twice. They play them on the road as well. Washington's at home. So listen, you can't. You got to win 6 or 7. Or then your season really bottoms out. I mean, Pikiell can't afford to go 3-17 in Big Ten play. That would just be a disaster, and that would just feed into all the negativity that's coming into this season. If you can win 8-9 games in Big Ten play, you win 9-10 games in non-conference play, you have a winning season. And I think if you get a winning season, you're going to get some respect for that. Again, year 10, it's disappointing that's kind of the hope of what happens, but you need to achieve that, I think, to have a little bit of momentum, and Kelly Zen working hard to get you NIL. And I think, that it could certainly turn the tide a little bit. Obviously, making the NCAA tournament would do wonders for this program, would do wonders for Steve Pikiell, change the narrative back, I think, for his tenure. This is a coach that, slowly and gradually got this program to a point it hadn't been in, many, many years, decades. And then there's been a slow decline and a regression and disappointment and frustration. And where are we going to go from here? And I think that's the big key for this program. Just going to go back to my notes here as we close out this preview. And just in terms of where this team is, I think the margin for error is so slim. There's a lot of things that have to go right for this program to have a successful season. It's certainly possible. I don't think they're going to be a second to last place team. Every team goes to the Big Ten tournament now, regardless. But, I think they have a legit chance to be in the middle of the pack. I'm talking, 10, 11, 12, 13. but you're going to have to develop an identity. You're going to have to settle on a rotation, and you're going to have consistent production from that rotation. Guys are going to have to embrace roles. Guys are going to have to accept, what this team needs them to do to be successful. And I think last year you saw a lot of just wildness from that team, guys not embracing roles, guys trying to be hero ball, and I think the chemistry was off. I mean, how could it not be when you have 2 top 5 picks and, a bunch of role players that really aren't on the same caliber? I think the disappointment of last season as a Rutgers fan basically my whole life, I'll never get over that. I'll never get over last season. I don't think anybody will. And this season, regardless of what happens, it's you can't make up for that, right? But you have to get some momentum back. You have to get momentum back, because otherwise, if you bottom out even more than you have the last 2 seasons, it's hard to envision, unless Kelly Zinn just gets a massive influx of money for a treasure chest of NIL, it's really hard to see things significantly turning around. And I think that's really kind of this season is turning the trajectory back upward, getting it to a place where this program's respected and credible in Big Ten play, pulls off a couple upsets, hovers around that 500 mark in Big Ten play. Maybe he's in the bubble conversation. So listen, you never know how other teams are going to mesh. That's the thing with the NIL era, with so many new players and rotations, you just never know. And Rutgers Steve Pikiell has always been at his best when the team's been back against the wall. And if this team, has the exciting thing is this nucleus, that they somehow return, year 2 could show some real improvement. But if you could be a top 5 Big Ten defensive team, if you can have some real leadership on the floor, that was lacking last year. I expect Buchanan, Grant, Zrno. I don't know how vocal he will be, but you need some leaders on this floor. You need passion on this floor. This team could end up being a very likable team for Rutgers fans. They really could. And we need that. We need that, because the tension, the frustration, the pressure, and then the negativity that's existed the last few years. Listen, as I said at the start of this episode, I think it's taking a toll on this program. It's taking a toll on Steve Pikiell. I think he's pretty defensive. And I just want to see him enjoy himself again and enjoy this team. It's been hard to watch, just to see him bear that load and really, not embrace, I think, the fan base. And there's always going to be extreme takes. There's always going to be negativity. And I think the fan base wants to see a team that they're proud of, wants to see an identity. And this program has kind of lost its identity. And, he deserves credit for getting Harper and Bailey here, because it was relationships that got him here. And Steve has always done things the right way. The program, of course, we're proud of the way this program leads by example off the court. But at the end of the day, you have to show results, and you have to win, and you have to make the NCAA tournament to keep things trucking. And they haven't been able to do that. And there's real concern that that's not going to happen again this year. And I think it's fair and legitimate concern. And to be defensive and to kind of, misrepresent the past, maybe just kind of be a little bit, I think I wish he was a little bit more transparent, a little bit more willing to take on that kind of accountability and say to fans, listen, we get it. We failed, and we got to get back there. And he said it to a degree, but I understand if he's uncomfortable, but I think the more that he could kind of show fans the passion he has and not worry about, the extreme fans that are out there, and worry about the loyal fans that this program has had for decades, and that want to just see a brand of Rutgers basketball that they can be proud of. I think that's what it's all about. And I hope that this team can do it. But at the end of the day, going into the year, it's hard to be too optimistic, simply because there's so many question marks. There's so many things that have to go right for this program to have a winning season. And I think time will tell. You got to show progress in those first 5 games. You got to win those games. You got to find your team in those 5 games, because you go to Vegas, it gets real quick, and then you get back and Big Ten play happens. And I think you can't let things snowball. You can't let things get out of hand where you get to January and hope is gone. You need to get into the new year with legitimate hope, with a bit of a resume in your hand, and you never know what can happen. And if positive energy can be injected into this program, stranger things have happened. So no one wants to see this program succeed more than I do, as do every other Rutgers fan that truly cares about this program. We're all in it together. And here's rooting for Steve Pikiell in this program to turn it around this season, and to see a brand of basketball that we can be proud of. I mean, Zrno, again, I'll harp on it. For me, he's the key to everything. If he could be a legit Big Ten scorer, a legit Big Ten, all Big Ten player, and maybe that's asking a lot, but based on the way the roster is constructed, I think you need that. You need Newley to be a legitimate all freshman player. You need Buchanan to step up and be the guy he was his freshman year at GW in the Big Ten. This team has some real swagger out there. They got to play with an edge. They got to be defensive. They got to make it real for other teams and make it as hard as possible at all times to score. They got to play 60 minutes of hard-nosed basketball. I want to see full throttle basketball on the break, all that. So here's to hoping for the best for this program, Rutgers basketball 2025-2026. There's my preview. I'll be back doing recaps after every game. We'll be back for Rider on Wednesday. If I think of anything else, I'll maybe put something out quick before the season. But thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.